Good morning, everyone. So today the group 7 is going to present our topic about audit of the payroll and personal cycle. But before we present and give explanation about the topic, we would first like to apologize for our cameras off due to some connections problem. But we hope our voice will be clear and that the explanation also will be clear. So our group members are composed of first Maria, there is also Nelson, and finally me, Linda. Next slide, please. So in order to give more details about the topic that I mentioned before, the learning objective for this topic would be first identify the accounts and transactions in the payroll and personal cycle. Second, to describe the business functions and the related documents and records in the payroll and personal cycle. The third one is about understanding internal control and design, and also performing tests of controls and substantive tests of transaction for the payroll and personal cycle. And finally, the aim is also to design and perform substantive analytical procedures and tests of details of for accounts in the payroll and personal cycle. The first and second learning objective will be presented by Maria. Maria, time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Next. Okay, so the first learning objective is about identify the accounts and transactions in the payroll and personal cycle. So the payroll and personal cycle objective is to evaluate whether the account balance affected by the cycle are fairly stated in accordance with applicable account standards. As you can see in the figure, there are typical accounts in the payroll and personal cycle. The P accounts are used to illustrate the way in which account information flows through the various accounts in the payroll and personal cycle. In most systems, the accrued wages and salaries account is used only at the end of an accounting period. Throughout the period, expenses are charged when the employees are actually paid rather than when the labor costs are incurred. So accruals for labors are recorded by adjusting entries at the end of the period for any earned but unpaid labor costs. Next. So the next learning objective is to describe the business function and the related documents and records in the payroll and personal cycle. So the payroll and personal cycle begins with hiring employees and ends with paying them for the services they perform, and the government and other institutions for withheld and accrued payroll taxes and benefits. In between, the cycle involves obtaining services from employees consistent with company objectives and properly accounting for the services. So in the table, as you can see, is about classes of transactions, accounts, business functions, and related documents and records for the payroll and personal cycle. So in the class of transactions, there are payroll. In the part of accounts, there are payroll cash, all payroll expense accounts, all payroll withholding accounts, and all payroll accrual accounts. And in the business functions, there are 4: human resource and employment, timekeeping and payroll preparation, payment of payroll, and preparation of payroll tax, and payment of taxes. So in the human resource and employment, this department provides an independent source for interviewing and hiring qualified personnel. Also, an independent source of records for the internal verification of wage information, including additions and deletions from the payroll and changes in wages and deductions. So in the documents and reports for the human resource and employment are human resource reports, deduction authorization form, and rate authorization form. The next is the timekeeping and payroll preparation are important in the audit of payroll because they directly affect payroll expense for each period. Adequate controls are necessary to prevent misstatements in the following four activities, which are prepare time reports by employees, summarize and calculate gross pay, deduction and net pay, payment of payroll, and prepare payroll reports. So in the documents and reports, there are time reports, job time ticket, payroll transaction file, payroll journal or listing, and payroll master file. And in the payment of payroll, the documents and reports are payroll direct deposit or checks and payroll bank account reconciliation. And the last one is the preparation of payroll tax returns and payment of taxes. The documents that and reports needed is W-2 form and payroll tax return. So next will be explained by Nelson.
Thank you, Maria. Now I will spend the understand internal control and design and perform a test of control and substantive test of transaction for the payroll and personal cycle. Internal control for a payroll is normally highly structured and well controlled to manage case dispute, to minimize employee complaint and justification, and to minimize payroll fraud. Because of relatively common payroll concern from company to company, high quality computerized payroll accounting programs are available. Because processing payroll is similar for most organizations and programs need to be modified annually for change in the withholding schedules. Companies commonly use outside payroll service for the processing payroll. It is usually not difficult for the company to establish good control in the payroll and personal cycle. For factor and office employee, there are usually a large number of relatively homogeneous small amount transactions. For executive, there are usually fewer payroll transactions, but they are ordinarily consistent in timing and amount. Test of control and a substantive test of transaction procedure are the most important means of the verification account balance in the payroll and personal cycle. These tests are implicit because of the lack of the independent third-party evidence, such as the confirmation for verification accrued was withheld income tax, accrued payroll tax, and another balance sheet account. Furthermore, in most audits, the amount in the balance sheet account are small and can be verified with relative easy if the auditor is confident that payroll transactions are correctly entered into the computer and payroll tax returns are correctly prepared. Even though the text of the controls and substantive text of the transaction are the most important part of the testing payroll, tests in this area are usually not extensive. Many audits have a minimal risk of material misstatement, even though payroll is often a significant part of total expense. There are three reasons for this. Employees are likely to complain to management if they are underpaid. All payroll transactions are typically uniform and uncomplicated. Payroll transactions are subject to audit by federal and state government for income tax withholding, social security, and unemployment tax. Here, the summary of transaction-related audit objective, key control, text of control, and substantive text of transaction for payroll. As here we can see the table. Here, transaction related to audit objective, there is 5. Transaction, it's like occurrence, completeness, occurrence, posting and summarization, and classification and timing. Here we can see here in key internal control, common text of control, common substantive text of transaction. Here the exists payroll. Here different amount. Here we can see different objective and different proposed. Here you can see the same here, and the next will be explained by Linda.
Okay, thank you, Nelson. Can you please go to the next chapter? Okay. So in this part, I'm going to explain about how to design and perform substantive analytical procedures and test of details for accounts in the payroll and personal cycle. So let's first note that during the first two phases of the audit, auditors assess control risk and perform tests of controls and substantive tests of transactions. So after completing this test and assessing the likelihood of misstatement in financial statement accounts in the payroll and personal cycle, in this case, the auditor has to follow the methodology for designing tests of details of balance. So there are a few phases when we are talking about that. There is in the phase 1, we have the identification of client business risk affecting payroll. In this case, significant client business risks affecting payroll are unlikely for most companies. However, client business risk may exist for complex compensation arrangements, including, for example, like we are talking about bonus and stock option plans and other deferred compensation arrangements. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have also to set performance materiality and assess inherent risk, which is also in the phase 1, where most companies have a large number of transactions involving payroll, often with large total amounts. However, balance sheet accounts are normally insignificant except for labor charge to inventory. There is also in the phase 1 and 2, we have to assess control risk and perform related tests, which was already explained in the previous chapter. There is also performing substantive analytical procedures, which is the phase 3, where the use of substantive analytical procedures is as important in the payroll and the personal cycle as it is in every other cycle. Next, please. Okay, so here we have a table like explaining substantive analytical procedures that for the balance sheet and income statement accounts in the payroll and personal cycle. In the left side, you have the substantive analytical procedures, and in the right side, you have the possible misstatement. For example, given like the first one is to compare payroll expense account balance with previous years, for example. So the possible misstatement in this case can be a payroll expense account, for example. So yeah, you can see in the next point that I mentioned the type of misstatement that can be occurred. So through the verification of the liability accounts associated with payroll, often termed as accrued payroll expenses, it is ordinarily straightforward if internal controls are operating effectively. So next chapter, please. Okay, so when the auditor is satisfied that the payroll transactions are being correctly recorded in the payroll journal and the related payroll tax forms are being accurately prepared and taxes promptly paid, the test of details of balances should not be time consuming. So in this case, the two major balance related audit objectives in testing payroll liabilities are First, to accurate in the trial balance, which are stated at the correct amount. We are talking about accuracy. And the second one is the transactions in the payroll and personal cycle, which have to be recorded in the proper period. We are talking about cutoff. So the primary concern in both objectives is to make sure that there are no understated or omitted accruals. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we have the major liability accounts in the payroll and personal cycle, which are first amounts withheld from employees' pays, accrued salaries and wages, accrued commissions, accrued bonuses, accrued vacation pay, sick pay or other benefits, accrued payroll taxes, and test of details of balance for expense of accounts, and finally, presentation and disclosure objectives. Next, please. Okay, so in this last illustration, which is about the major accounts in the payroll and personal cycle in the types of audit tests used to audit these accounts, like you can see here, a summary of the transactions, which was already explained before. Can you please go forward to the next slide? Okay. Okay, thank you for your attention. I'm really sorry for all the bugging that was mentioned before. That's all for our presentation today, and have a nice day. Thank you.